I love you.
I heard Mara Ellery fall before I saw her. That was the thing I remembered later, not the rain, not the broken light over the back steps, not the toolbox cutting into my palm after a 12-hour day, fixing a stair lift for a man who kept calling me kid, even though I was 37. It was the sound. A sharp scrape, a gasp pulled tight, then the kind of silence people make when they are trying very hard not to need help. I was halfway through the rear entrance of our building, soaked through my jacket, thinking only about reheating leftover chili and pretending my life had a shape, when I stopped on the landing. The rain came sideways through the alley, tapping against the metal railing, and there she was on the lower step, one hand braced against the wall, dark hair stuck to her cheek, one knee drawn close like she was negotiating with pain in private. Mara looked up at me with an expression I had seen on people trapped in elevators, people embarrassed before they were scared. She did not say my name at first. She just said, "I'm fine," which, in my line of work, usually meant something was absolutely not fine and had begun making expensive noises. I set my toolbox down slowly and kept my hands visible because there are ways to help that feel like help and ways to help that feel like ownership. Mara Ellery lived one floor above me. Children's book illustrator, late-night lamp glow, quiet footsteps, watercolor stains sometimes on her sleeves. We had traded neighbor sentences for 2 years. Your package is by the mailboxes, the dryer is eating quarters again, do you smell gas, or is that Mrs. Park's soup? Nothing deep enough to name, but enough that I knew she always carried her keys between 2 fingers when walking in from the alley, and she knew I came home late enough to make the stairs complain. I asked if she could move her foot, and she gave me a look like I had insulted her ancestors. I said I'm fine. I nodded because arguing with pride only makes it put on armor. Good. Then you can be fine sitting down for 10 seconds before you try to win a fight with wet concrete. That almost got me a smile. Almost. She tried to stand anyway, and the second her weight shifted, her face changed. Not dramatically. Mara was too controlled for that. It was just a flash around her mouth, the quick betrayal of pain before she locked it away. I stepped closer but stopped before touching her. "Tell me where you want my hand," I said. She looked at me then, really looked, rain running down from her hairline, eyes bright with irritation and something underneath it. Most people don't ask that. I told her most people made bad technicians, and after a second, she put one hand on my forearm. I helped her up the stairs slowly, and I made myself look at the steps, not at the way her fingers tightened when her balance shifted. She was light against my arm, but not helpless. There is a difference. Her apartment door was close, but the hallway felt longer than it had any right to be. Mrs. Park's door cracked open exactly 1 inch, which was her preferred distance for pretending not to spy. Mara noticed, stiffened, and straightened too fast. I felt it through her hand. That was when I understood the fall had hurt her less than being witnessed. By the time we reached her door, she had rebuilt herself into politeness. She thanked me, told me she had ice, told me not to worry, and said good night in the tone people use when they are closing more than a door. I went downstairs, changed out of my wet shirt, and stood in my kitchen without turning on the light. My apartment was quiet in the usual way, the kind of quiet I had once called peace, and now privately suspected was just no one interrupting me. I told myself Mara had made it inside. I told myself grown women did not need divorced stairlift technicians inventing reasons to check on them. I told myself several reasonable things, which is how I usually knew I was lying. 20 minutes later, someone knocked. It was not the confident knock of Mrs. Park with soup or the building manager with a complaint. It was 3 soft taps, then a pause, then one more, like whoever stood there had almost changed her mind. When I opened the door, Mara was in the hallway barefoot, wearing an oversized cream cardigan over dark leggings, her hair still damp at the ends. Her face was pale, but her eyes were awake in a way that made my chest tighten before I understood why. Her phone lit up in her hand. She turned it slightly away, but not fast enough. The name on the screen was Trent. "I know I said I was fine," she said, and her voice was steadier than her hands. I stepped back without thinking, then stopped myself from making it too easy, because fear deserves choices. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. She looked past me into the apartment, then back down the hall toward the stairwell. For one strange second, it felt like she was measuring the distance between being alone and being believed. Then she nodded. I left the door half open until she noticed. She did notice. Mara noticed everything. She sat at the edge of my kitchen chair like she did not trust furniture to keep its promises, and I put a glass of water on the table, far enough away that she could decide when to take it. Her phone buzzed again. This time she flinched, and that told me more than any explanation would have. I asked if someone was coming over. She swallowed once, stared at the screen, and said, "He thinks he still gets to decide when I'm safe." I did not ask who Trent was, not yet. I just stood by the counter, close enough that she did not have to raise her voice, far enough that she could leave if she wanted. Mara wrapped both hands around the phone, then looked up at me with an expression I had no defense against, because it was not helpless. It was furious and tired and honest. "Caleb," she whispered, "stay close." Before I could answer, the phone lit again. This time she let me see it. The message read, "I heard you fell again. Open the door before this gets worse." There are moments when a room tells the truth before people do. My kitchen was small enough that I could hear the refrigerator click on, hear rain ticking against the window, hear Mara trying to breathe like she had not just shown a stranger. A message that sounded polite, only if you did not know how fear worked. She sat with her bare feet tucked under the chair, one hand around her phone, the other pressed lightly against the side of her knee. I wanted to ask if the fall had twisted something. I wanted to get ice, check swelling, make a list, solve the obvious things first, because obvious things were where I felt useful. Instead, I asked if she wanted the door open or closed. Mara looked at the hallway, then at me, and said closed, but not locked. So I closed it and left the deadbolt alone. I got a towel from the bathroom and a blanket from the couch, then stopped before putting either around her. That pause mattered more than it should have. Mara noticed it the way she noticed everything, with those tired eyes that made a man feel both seen and examined. I set the towel on the table and the blanket on the chair beside her, then said she could use either one or neither one. She gave a small breath that was not quite a laugh. "You always do that," she said. I asked what she meant, and she looked down at the towel. "You leave people room to say no." I tried to joke that elevator panels had taught me consent because pushing the wrong button could ruin everybody's day, but the joke came out quieter than I meant it to. She touched the edge of the blanket but did not pull it around herself yet. "Most people call that overthinking," she said. I told her most people were loud. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she turned it face down like the screen had burned her. I asked if Trent was her boyfriend, and she corrected me so quickly it sounded practiced. "Ex," she said, then after a pause, "officially." That word told me the unofficial part was still standing outside her life with a spare key. I filled a plastic bag with ice, wrapped it in a dish towel, and placed it on the table between us. She stared at it like accepting it might sign a document she had not read. Then she took it and pressed it against her knee with a controlled little wince. I asked how he knew she had fallen, and her mouth tightened. Probably the building chat. Mrs. Park saw enough to worry, and she worries in public. I thought about the 1-inch crack in Mrs. Park's door, and believed that immediately. Mara added that Trent used to be in the chat when he stayed over sometimes, and maybe nobody had removed him, or maybe he had asked somebody, or maybe he had one of those charming voices that made people answer questions they should not answer. I reached for my phone, already thinking of the building manager, group settings, access lists, practical fixes. Mara saw the movement and said my name once, not sharply, but firmly enough that I stopped. "You're doing it," she said. I looked at her. "Doing what?" She pressed the ice harder against her knee, then said I was trying to turn fear into a maintenance request. That should have annoyed me. Instead, it landed somewhere old. My ex-wife used to say I could handle emergencies because emergencies gave me instructions, but when life got quiet and messy, I disappeared behind repairs. I had hated hearing it because part of it was true, so I put the phone down. Mara watched the whole decision happen and softened by 1 degree. "I'm not saying don't help," she said. "I'm saying don't make this smaller just because small things are easier to fix." That was when I realized she had not come to my door because of a fall. Not really. The fall was visible, convenient, something a man like Trent could point at and turn into a story about her needing supervision. Whatever had brought her downstairs again was older than tonight and sharper than a bruised knee. I asked what she wanted from me right now, and Mara looked at the water glass as if the answer might be floating there. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's the part I hate." Then, almost like it embarrassed her, she pulled the blanket around her shoulders. My blanket, gray and worn at the edges, swallowed the cream cardigan and made her look smaller for 1 second before her chin lifted in protest against her own vulnerability. I looked away first because staring would have turned her honesty into a spectacle. The phone buzzed again, then rang. Trent's name filled the screen. Mara did not touch it. The sound went on long enough to become another person in the kitchen, patient and confident and unwelcome. When it stopped, she exhaled like she had been holding herself still underwater. I asked if he had ever hurt her. She shook her head too fast, then seemed angry at the answer for being incomplete. "Not like that," she said. "That's the problem. He's careful. He says things that sound reasonable when repeated by someone else." I knew that kind of person. The ones who never had to raise their voice because they had learned where everyone kept their doubt. Before I could answer, the old intercom by my front door buzzed so loudly that Mara flinched hard enough to drop the ice pack. I looked toward the speaker, then back at her. Her face had gone very still. The buzzer came again, longer this time. Then a man's voice filled my apartment through the cracked, grainy speaker from downstairs. Calm, polished, almost friendly. "Caleb, this is Trent Harlow. I know Mara's with you. Send her down so we can handle this like adults." The intercom speaker had always sounded terrible, like every voice had to crawl through dust and old wiring before reaching my apartment. But Trent Harlow still managed to sound expensive through it. Calm, smooth, patient in a way that made patience feel like a threat. Mara stared at the little beige box by my door as if it had grown teeth. I could see her body wanting to shrink and her pride refusing to let it. Her hand tightened around the blanket, and the ice pack lay on the floor near her bare foot, forgotten. I did not move toward the intercom right away. That was my first useful decision of the night. The old Caleb, the one my ex-wife used to call a good man with bad emotional timing, would have answered immediately, just to take control of the noise. But Mara had not come to me because she needed another man to take over. She had come because she needed one person in the room who would not. I asked her quietly if she wanted me to answer. Mara looked at me with surprise first, then something softer and more dangerous to my self-control than fear. "You're asking?" she said. I told her it seemed like a good habit. The intercom buzzed again, and Trent's voice returned before she could answer, still measured, still performing for an audience he probably assumed did not exist. He said Mara was hurt, embarrassed, and not thinking clearly, and that he appreciated me helping her. But this was a private matter. That phrase did something to her. Private matter. I saw it land in her shoulders, in the way her jaw tightened, in the sudden hard focus of her eyes. She had heard those words before, I thought. Maybe in kitchens, maybe in parking lots, maybe outside restaurants where he smiled at other people while quietly deciding what she was allowed to feel. I checked the hallway camera from my phone, then the lobby feed the building manager had once given me after a package theft and never remembered to revoke. Trent stood downstairs by the glass entrance, holding a bouquet of white flowers like a man arriving for forgiveness he had already scheduled. He wore a dark wool coat, hair neat despite the rain, one hand resting near the intercom panel. He was good-looking in the way that made strangers trust him with directions. That irritated me more than it should have. Mara leaned slightly toward the screen, but did not come close enough to touch me. I turned the phone so she could see without stepping into my space. She looked at the flowers and let out a small sound, almost a laugh, except there was no humor in it. "He brought lilies," she said. "I hate lilies." I said that seemed like information a concerned man might have collected. Her mouth moved like she wanted to smile and could not afford it. The intercom clicked again. "Mara," Trent said, no longer using my name. "Come downstairs. You fell. You're shaken up." "I'm not angry." She flinched at the last sentence, and I understood then that anger was not the only thing people used to trap someone. Sometimes forgiveness came before the crime was even named, and that was worse. I told her she did not have to say anything. I also told her that if she wanted to say something, I would stand right there and keep my mouth shut unless she asked otherwise. Mara stared at the intercom for a long second. Then she pushed the blanket off her shoulders, stood too quickly, winced, and caught the back of the chair. Every instinct I had lunged forward, but I stopped half a step away. She saw that too. Of course she did. "Stay close," she said again, but this time it was not a whisper. It was an instruction she trusted me to understand. She pressed the talk button with one finger. Her voice came out thinner than she probably wanted, but it came out. "Trent, go home." Downstairs, on my phone screen, he went very still. Not shocked. Calculating. Then he tilted his head toward the intercom and said, gently enough to make my skin crawl, that she was making this harder than it had to be. He said Caleb seemed like a decent guy, but involving neighbors after a minor accident was not fair to anyone. Mara closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was clearer. She told him she had not involved me. She had knocked on my door because she did not want to be alone. Trent's expression changed by maybe 1 inch, but that inch showed me the real man underneath the flowers. He told her she always did this when she was overwhelmed, always turned a small thing into a dramatic stand, always punished people for caring. That was when another door opened in the hall. Mrs. Lena Park emerged in a purple robe, hair wrapped in a scarf, holding a mug like she had been born ready for testimony. She looked from me to Mara to the intercom, then asked in a stage whisper whether the flower man downstairs was causing trouble. Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Mara almost did, but Trent heard enough. His eyes flicked upward toward the camera. Suddenly, the lobby was not as private as he had assumed. I said nothing. Mara noticed me saying nothing, and something steadied in her. She pressed the button again and told Trent, "I'm not coming down. Do not wait for me. Do not call me again tonight." He said her name sharply then, just once, and there it was, the command hiding under concern. Mrs. Park took one step closer to my doorway and said, loudly enough for the intercom to catch, that if the gentleman did not leave, she had no problem calling building security, the police, or her nephew, who apparently worked nights and enjoyed parking disputes. Trent looked up again, smiled without warmth, and stepped back from the entrance. "This isn't over," he said. But he said it quieter now. Mara answered before I could. "No," she said, her hand still on the button, "but it's over for tonight." We watched him leave through the lobby glass, the lilies hanging at his side like evidence of a performance that had failed. Only after the camera showed him turning the corner did Mara let go of the intercom. Her knees bent slightly, not enough to fall, just enough for the truth to pass through her body. I moved the chair closer with my foot instead of reaching for her. She sank into it and covered her mouth with one hand, breathing hard through the aftermath of saying no. Mrs. Park asked if she wanted tea, soup, or a baseball bat, and Mara gave a broken little laugh that sounded like pain leaving through the only door it could find. I told Mrs. Park tea would be safest for all involved. She nodded solemnly, as if accepting a tactical assignment, and disappeared back into her apartment. When the hallway quieted, Mara looked up at me. The blanket had slipped from one shoulder, her damp hair curled against her cheek, and her eyes carried the exhausted shock of someone who had survived something invisible. "That wasn't the first time," she said. I did not ask what she meant. I only waited. She looked at the intercom, then at the closed door, then finally at me. It wasn't the first time he used concern to make people doubt me. Mrs. Park brought tea in a chipped blue pot, 2 mugs that did not match, and the satisfied expression of a woman who had waited years for our building to become interesting after 9 p.m. She did not ask questions, which made me respect her more than I expected. She simply set everything on the counter, looked at Mara's bare feet, then at me, and said she would be awake if anyone needed anything, because at her age, sleep was mostly a suggestion. When she left, the hallway went quiet again, and the quiet felt different. Not safe exactly, but less crowded. Trent was gone from the lobby, the intercom had stopped buzzing, and Mara sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug she had not tasted. Her knee was swelling under the edge of her leggings, but she looked less concerned about pain than about the story already forming around it. I asked if she wanted to put the ice back on, and she nodded without meeting my eyes. I picked it up from where it had fallen, rewrapped it, and placed it near her hand. She took it after a second, pressing it against her knee with a careful inhale. I could see her fighting the urge to apologize for being in my apartment, for taking up space, for needing a chair and a blanket, and one witness who had not been charmed by lilies. I knew that impulse too well. just dressed differently. Mine came out as jokes and extra work. Hers came out as perfect posture and "I'm fine," spoken like a locked door. I said she did not have to explain anything tonight. Mara gave me a tired look over the steam from her tea and said, "That sounds generous, until you realize I came here because I needed someone to know." So I sat down across from her and let the table stay between us. She stared at the mug for a while before she told me about the accident from 6 years earlier. Not dramatically, not in the way people tell a story they have polished for sympathy. She said there had been a truck, rain, a turn that should have been ordinary, and 3 months where her body did not feel like it belonged to her. Her balance came back mostly, but not perfectly. Some days were normal. Some days, stairs had opinions. She had learned what helped. Railings, better shoes, not rushing, not pretending pride could replace physics. Then she met Trent, and at first his attention felt like relief. He remembered appointments, carried groceries, noticed uneven sidewalks. He made concern look like romance, until one day she realized every helpful gesture came with a receipt. I listened without interrupting because interrupting would have turned her life into something I was trying to organize. Mara said Trent never called her weak, not directly. He was too smart for that. He said she pushed herself too hard, said she hated accepting reality, said people who loved her deserved to worry. He would put a hand at her back in public before she asked. Answer for her when someone asked if she wanted stairs or an elevator. Text her if she stayed out later than expected, and frame it as panic. And the worst part, she said, pressing the ice harder against her knee, is that sometimes he was right about the practical thing. I should use the railing. I should slow down. I did fall tonight because I was angry and rushing and trying to prove a point to a staircase that did not care. Her mouth twisted. Now he gets to make it mean everything. I understood that more than I wanted to. People love turning one visible mistake into a complete explanation of who you were. My ex-wife had done it differently. Cleaner maybe, but it still left marks. I told Mara that after my divorce, everyone called me steady like it was a compliment, until I realized steady was what people called a man when they liked his usefulness more than his presence. My ex used to say I was great when the basement flooded, great when the car died, great when her father needed a ramp installed after surgery. But when nothing was burning, I became a locked garage. I tried to laugh after saying it, because that was where I usually put pain when it had nowhere else to sit. Mara did not laugh. She looked at me like she had opened a book and found a sentence underlined in her own handwriting. "Maybe you weren't absent," she said quietly. "Maybe you were only loved when something needed fixing." I did not have a good answer for that. The words moved through me too cleanly, found the place I usually kept covered with work orders and early mornings and the kind of competence that asked for nothing back. I looked down at my hands on the table, rough from metal edges and old wiring, and for the first time all night, I felt exposed without anyone accusing me of anything. Mara seemed to realize what she had touched. She softened, almost apologizing, then stopped herself. I was glad she stopped. The truth should not always have to dress itself up as kindness. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. The rain softened outside. Somewhere upstairs, pipes knocked in the walls. Mara shifted the ice pack and winced, and I leaned forward before I could stop myself. She noticed the movement, of course, but this time she did not pull away. She only said, "You can ask." So I asked if I could look at her knee, just enough to see whether she needed urgent care. She hesitated, then nodded. I moved my chair closer, slowly, and checked the swelling without putting my hands anywhere she had not allowed. It was tender, probably bruised, maybe strained, but not the kind of wrong that made my stomach drop. Still, being that close to her changed the air. Her cardigan had slipped off one shoulder. Her hair smelled faintly like rain and paper, something clean underneath the night's fear. I kept my eyes on her knee because looking up felt like crossing a line neither of us had named. She said my name, and I did look up then. Mara's face was tired, unguarded in a way that made my chest ache. When I said stay close, she said, "I didn't mean because I thought you could stop him." I waited. She swallowed. "I meant because when you're close, I don't feel like I have to disappear to stay safe." That was the kind of sentence a man remembers by accident for the rest of his life. I wanted to touch her hand. I wanted it badly enough that I did not do it. Instead, I sat back before wanting could start pretending to be comfort. Mara saw that too, and something almost like disappointment passed across her face before she hid it. Then her phone lit up again, not Trent this time. A message from the building manager appeared across the screen, polite and terrible. "Mara, Trent contacted me about your fall. We may need to discuss an emergency assistance note for your file, just for safety." She stared at it until the light dimmed. Then she looked at me, and the fear was gone from her face, replaced by something sharper. "He's already trying to make it official," she said. By morning, the building had changed shape without moving an inch. The same hallway carpet still curled near Mrs. Park's door, the same radiator still knocked like it had unfinished business, and the same weak winter light came through the stairwell window, but everything felt watched now. Mara went back upstairs just after 7 with my blanket folded over one arm and an ice pack in the other, moving slowly but refusing my offer to carry either. She said she needed to change, feed her cat, and try to work before the whole day turned into Trent's version of events. I wanted to walk her up. I wanted to say I would stay outside her door. I wanted to make a dozen practical suggestions that sounded helpful and felt suspiciously like fear wearing a tool belt. Instead, I asked if she wanted me nearby. She looked tired enough to be honest and said, "Not yet, but don't go far." Then she gave me back the blanket, though her fingers stayed on it a second longer than necessary, and that tiny pause followed me around my apartment for the next hour like a song I did not know the words to. I tried to work. That was what I did when emotions started taking up too much floor space. I cleaned my tools, answered 2 service emails, and pretended to study a wiring diagram for a stairlift motor while seeing nothing but Mara at my kitchen table, telling me she did not disappear when I was close. Around 10, I heard movement upstairs, the careful rhythm of someone trying not to limp loud enough for the building to hear. Then I heard her chair scrape, faintly, above my ceiling. I knew where her desk sat because I had fixed the outlet near it the year before, pretending not to notice the sketches taped to the wall. Foxes in raincoats, a moon with spectacles, children standing bravely in forests full of gentle monsters. Mara made things for children who needed the dark to look survivable. I wondered how long she had been doing that for herself. Mrs. Park arrived before lunch with soup, which in our building was less a meal and more a legal notice that she knew something. She handed me 1 container for myself and 1 for Mara, then stood in my doorway until I accepted that the soup came with information. She told me the building manager had sent a message asking whether residents knew of any accessibility concerns involving Mara, which was a phrase so clean it left fingerprints. Trent had apparently spoken to him that morning. Not loudly, not rudely, of course not. He had only expressed concern that Mara's fall showed a pattern and that maybe emergency contacts should be updated. Mrs. Park snorted when she said it, then added that men like Trent always said safety when they meant permission. I asked if she had replied. She said yes. She had written that Mara's only immediate safety concern was a handsome man with lilies who did not understand closed doors. I told her that was not exactly subtle. She said subtlety was for people with weak soup. I was still holding both containers when my sister June knocked without warning, because June believed surprise visits built character in lonely men. She took one look at my face, then at the second soup container, then toward the ceiling as if she could see through plaster. "So," she said, "which neighbor has you looking like you forgot how breathing works?" I told her she was early for whatever interrogation she had planned. She stepped inside anyway, dropped her purse on my counter, and asked if this was about Mara Ellery. I should have denied it faster. June's eyebrows rose, with the satisfaction of a woman watching a guilty man confess by blinking. I gave her the shortest version I could without betraying Mara's private details: the fall, Trent downstairs, the building manager message. June listened, arms folded, her expression sharpening in the way it had when we were kids and someone tried to blame me for something she had actually done. When I finished, June did not tell me to stay out of it. That surprised me. She looked toward the stairs and said, "Just make sure you're not confusing respect with hiding." I told her I was trying not to become another man deciding what Mara needed. June nodded like that was the first intelligent thing I had said all day, then ruined it by adding, "Good." But stepping so far back that she has to wonder whether she imagined your care, that can hurt too. I hated how easily my family could find the soft places. I said Mara had enough pressure without me adding feelings to the pile. June's face softened then, not with pity, which I would have rejected, but with recognition. She said, "Caleb, wanting someone doesn't automatically make you dangerous. Pretending you don't want her while standing close enough to catch her might make you confusing, though." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Mara's name appeared on the screen, and June's expression changed so dramatically I almost told her to leave on principle. Mara's text said Trent was in the lobby with the building manager. No panic, no extra words, just the fact laid flat. I was already moving toward the door when a second message came through. "Don't come charging down." I stopped with my hand on the knob. June read my face and said, "She knows you." I opened the door anyway, slower this time, and found Mara standing in the hallway near the stairs, dressed in jeans, a loose green sweater, and sneakers this time, one hand on the railing. Her face was pale, but her chin was set. The soup container sat untouched on the floor outside her door, which for some reason made me want to break something. I asked what she wanted to do. She looked relieved that I had asked, and ashamed that relief still mattered. "I'm going down," she said. "He's telling Mr. Alden I need an emergency assistance note in my file. If I hide, it becomes true in everyone's mind before I even speak." I told her she did not owe anyone a performance of strength. She gave me a small, tired smile. "No. But I owe myself the sound of my own voice." That shut me up. She started down one step, winced, and I moved before thinking. Her eyes cut to me, not angry, just clear. I stopped. Mara held the railing, breathed once, then looked at me over her shoulder. "Walk with me," she said. "Stay close, but don't hold me unless I ask." We went down the stairs slowly, which somehow made it harder. If Mara had rushed, I could have told myself adrenaline was carrying her. If she had leaned on me, I could have hidden inside the simple job of keeping her upright, but she did neither. She moved one step at a time, one hand on the railing, her injured knee careful but not defeated, and I stayed half a step behind her like she had asked. Close, but not holding. Close enough that I could see the tension in her shoulders every time her foot met the next stair. Close enough that if she reached back, I would be there. Far enough that everyone watching would have to understand she was walking under her own power. It took everything in me not to put a hand at her back. That was the strange cruelty of caring for someone who had been controlled in the name of protection. The thing you wanted most, to make it easier, could become the very thing that stole the meaning from her doing it herself. The lobby came into view through the stairwell glass before we reached the last landing. Trent stood near the mailboxes with Mr. Alden, our building manager, a tired man in a brown cardigan who treated maintenance requests like personal betrayals. Trent had changed out of last night's coat into something clean and expensive. Navy overcoat, polished shoes, hair perfect, face arranged into concern. No lilies this time, he had learned. Flowers looked romantic at midnight, but in daylight they made a man seem like he was trying too hard. Now he held a folder instead, which somehow looked worse. Mrs. Park was by the mail table pretending to sort coupons she had probably already sorted 3 times. June stood just inside the front entrance, arms folded, looking like she had not come to interfere but had absolutely come to witness. When she saw me, she gave the smallest nod. When she saw Mara, her expression softened, then hardened toward Trent. Mr. Alden looked relieved when we stepped into the lobby, which told me Trent had been talking for long enough to make any interruption feel like mercy. "Mara," he said, "I'm glad you're here." Trent was just explaining. Mara stopped at the bottom of the stairs, still holding the railing, and said she would prefer Trent not explain her to anyone. Her voice shook on the last word, but it did not break. Trent's eyes moved over her quickly, assessing the limp, the hand on the rail, me behind her, June near the door, Mrs. Park pretending not to enjoy herself. Then he smiled sadly, and I hated how practiced it was. He said he was only worried. He said nobody wanted to take away her independence. He said after last night's fall and her decision to spend the night in a neighbor's apartment, reasonable people had to ask reasonable questions. I felt my jaw tighten at the way he said neighbor, like he had found something dirty in a clean word. Mara did not look at me. That helped. If she had, I might have stepped in too soon. She kept her eyes on Trent and said, "I didn't spend the night here. I came downstairs because you wouldn't stop calling, then you showed up after I told you not to." Trent spread one hand, gentle, wounded. He told her he had been scared. He told Mr. Alden that Mara had a history of minimizing her condition, that she often became defensive when people cared, and that he understood how this looked. But someone had to be practical. The old me would have answered that. The technician in me wanted to dismantle each sentence like bad wiring. But Mara had asked me not to hold her unless she asked, and I realized that included not holding the conversation for her. So I stood close and quiet, feeling more useless than I had in years, and somehow more necessary too. Then Trent turned toward me. "And you," he said, still calm, "should be careful. I don't know what she told you, but vulnerable people can misread attention. You helped her after an accident. That doesn't make this what you might want it to be." The words hit exactly where he aimed them. I felt the old shame rise, the fear that wanting Mara made me no different from him, another man using her bruised night to get close. My hands curled once, then opened. Before I could decide whether silence was still restraint or just cowardice, Mara stepped off the last stair fully into the lobby. "No," she said. One word. Small, steady. Everyone looked at her. She took one more step, without the railing now, and said Trent did not get to call her vulnerable just because he liked her better scared. Falling did not give him permission to return. Her knee hurting did not make him responsible for her choices. Her old injury was not a door he could keep opening whenever he missed being important. Then her voice sharpened, not loud, but clear enough to travel across the lobby. "Concern without consent is control, Trent. And you have been calling control love for a long time." The lobby went silent in that particular way. People go silent when someone says the thing everyone else has been politely walking around. Trent's face changed. Not much, but enough. "Mr." Alden looked down at the folder like it had become contagious. "Mrs." Park stopped pretending with the coupons altogether. Trent asked if this was really her speaking, or if Caleb had been filling her head since last night. That was when Mara finally looked back at me. Not for permission. Not for rescue. For the truth of being seen while she chose the next words herself. She turned to Trent and said, "Caleb is the reason I remembered what it feels like to be near a man who doesn't make me smaller." I could not hide from that. Not from Trent. Not from June. Not from myself. I stepped beside Mara, not in front of her, and told Trent he needed to leave the building. My voice came out calm, which surprised me because nothing inside me felt calm. Trent laughed once, without humor, and said I was confusing proximity with intimacy. Then he looked at Mara with the clean cruelty of a man losing the room and needing one last cut. He said, "You're mistaking gratitude for attraction." Nobody moved. The sentence hung there, ugly and effective, because it asked the question I had been afraid to ask since she knocked on my door. Mr. Alden finally cleared his throat and said Trent was not listed as Mara's emergency contact and should leave unless invited by a resident. Mrs. Park added that he was invited by absolutely no one she respected. June opened the front door and held it with a smile so polite it was basically a weapon. Trent looked at all of us, then at Mara one last time, and for the first time since I had seen him, he had no performance ready. He left. Mara stayed still until the door closed behind him. Then she turned toward the stairs without speaking. I followed because she had asked me to stay close, and because after what she had said in the lobby, walking away from her felt impossible. On the landing between the first and second floors, she stopped. Her hand rested on the railing, but she was not leaning on it. She looked at me, eyes bright, face open in a way that scared me more than Trent ever had. Then she asked, "Is he right?" Mara asked the question softly, but there was nothing small about it. "Is he right?" It echoed in the stairwell with the smell of rain still caught in the walls, and the faint noise of traffic slipping through the front door below. I knew what she was really asking, and it was not whether Trent understood attraction. Men like Trent understood attraction only when it could be used as evidence against someone. She was asking if I saw her the way he wanted everyone to see her, bruised, grateful, confused, reaching for the nearest steady thing because the floor had gone out from under her. She was asking if my wanting her, if I was brave enough to call it that, had grown from her fear instead of from her. I looked at her hand on the railing, her injured knee held carefully, her face tired from standing up to a man who had spent too long teaching her to doubt the shape of her own voice. I did not answer fast, because fast answers had done enough damage in her life. I stepped onto the same landing but left space between us, the kind of space that had become our language. "No," I said finally, "but I was scared he might be." Her eyes flickered, not hurt exactly, but bracing for it. So I kept going before cowardice dressed itself up as restraint again. I told her I had been afraid since the moment she knocked on my door, because fear was there first, and I did not trust myself to know where care ended and wanting began. I told her I had spent years being the man people called when something broke, and I knew how easy it was to mistake usefulness for love, emergency for intimacy, gratitude for choice. Then I looked at her properly, not at the railing, not at the bruise, not at the stairwell where it had started, but at Mara herself. "I don't want you because you fell," I said. "I think I noticed you long before I had the nerve to admit there was anything to notice." That changed her face more than a kiss would have. She looked down, and for a second I thought she might turn away to protect both of us from the size of the moment. Instead, she gave the smallest laugh, tired and a little embarrassed, and said she had noticed me too. She noticed that I fixed Mrs. Park's railing without charging her because I knew she would pretend not to need it. She noticed that I always carried heavy boxes upstairs for the delivery guy when the elevator was out, then acted like I happened to be there. She noticed that when I came into her apartment to fix the outlet near her desk, I looked at her drawings like they were work, not cute little hobbies. She said I had a way of standing in a doorway that made it clear I would leave if asked, and somehow that had made her want me to stay. Then she swallowed and added, "Fear brought me to your door last night, Caleb. It is not why I came back to it in my head 100 times before that." I had spent a long time believing desire should announce itself like weather, obvious and impossible to miss. With Mara, it had moved more quietly. It had been the extra second in the hallway, the way I listened for her chair above my ceiling, the stupid satisfaction I felt when she laughed at one of my bad comments about the laundry machines. It had been wanting to know whether the fox in the raincoat ever found his way home, and never asking, because that felt too much like wanting to be invited into her world. Standing there on the landing, I realized restraint had protected her from pressure, but it had also protected me from being known. So I told her the truth as cleanly as I could. I wanted her. Not as someone to rescue, not as proof that I was a good man, not as a repair I could finish and step back from. I wanted the woman who hated lilies, drew brave children into dark forests, and could shake while saying no and still make the whole room smaller than her courage. Mara let out a breath that looked like it had been waiting years to leave. She stepped closer first, slowly, with one hand still near the railing but no longer gripping it. I did not touch her until she reached for me, and when she did, it was not for balance. Her fingers curled into the front of my shirt, careful and certain, and she said, "Now you can come closer." The kiss was not dramatic. No music swelled in the stairwell. No rain suddenly softened the world into a movie. Mrs. Park was probably listening through a door somewhere. June was probably downstairs, pretending not to wait, and my heart was beating like an appliance about to fail inspection. But Mara's mouth was warm, her hand was steady against my chest, and for the first time in a long time, being wanted did not feel like being needed for an emergency. It felt like being chosen after the emergency had passed. Things did not become perfect after that. Trent tried 2 more polite messages before Mara blocked him everywhere and changed her emergency contact to June, which June accepted with the seriousness of a military oath. "Mr. Alden removed Trent from the building chat and apologized in a way that sounded like he had swallowed a rulebook. Mara started using the railing without hating herself for it, and I learned that standing close did not always mean waiting for disaster. Sometimes it meant carrying coffee upstairs while she worked late, reading a new sketch before anyone else saw it, or sitting beside her on the back steps months later while she told me the fall no longer owned that place. The stairwell became ordinary again, which was the best thing it could have become. A few months later, Mara knocked on my door on a Friday night, wearing that same cream cardigan and a smile that made me forget whatever I had been doing. I opened the door and asked if everything was okay, because old habits take time to die. She looked at me, amused and soft, and said everything was fine. Then she stepped closer, close enough that I did not have to wonder what she wanted, and said, "I don't need you to stay close tonight." She took my hand and pulled me gently toward her. "I want you to come closer. Have you ever had someone care for you in a way that gave you more freedom instead of less? And do you think real love is proven by protecting someone or by trusting them to choose for themselves?" Tell me what you think in the comments. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe for more slow burn romance stories, and I'll see you in the next one.